Okay, this is part 5 of my reading of this book by Prince Felix Yusupov. And the full title again is Rasputin, His Malignant Influence in His Assassination. So I'll try to break it down into 6 parts, but I'll see what I can do. And where we left off was at the death of Rasputin at the house of Felix Yusupov, this kind of conspiracy. And it goes, so you can go check out the other 4 parts too before you read this, but now they're trying to figure out what to do with his body after he resisted all this poison. There's a rumor, I don't know if it's true, but there's a rumor that that Rasputin was slowly poisoning himself over time so he would become immune to poisons. Like he was that much of an adept that he was like slowly dosing himself. It's a rumor. I've never validated it. Maybe somebody who knows more about Rasputin could verify that. I don't know. Anyway, here's chapter 14, Death, which was no death. In conformity with our plan, the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, Captain Sukhotin, and Dr. Lazovert had now to stage a fictitious return of Rasputin to his own flat, in case the secret police had followed him on our drive to my house. Sukhotin had to disguise himself in Rasputin's fur coat and cap and drive off in Pereshkovich's car with the Grand Duke and the doctor in the direction of the Gorokhovaya. Rasputin's clothing had to be conveyed to the Warsaw station where it was to be burnt in Pereshkovich's Red Cross train, the car being left there. From the station, they were to take a cab and drive to the Grand Duke's palace. They were to pick up his closed car, in which they were to return to the Moika. Rasputin's body was then to be conveyed in that car from my home to the Petrovsky Island. We requested the doctor who acted as chauffeur to drive as fast as possible and try and cover his tracks. Pereskovich and I remained behind. While awaiting the return of our companions, we talked and dreamed of the future of our country, now forever delivered from her evil genius. We believed that Russia was saved, and that with Rasputin's disappearance, a new era had dawned. We believed that we should everywhere find support, that all of those who were near that seat of power, delivered from the intrigues of this upstart, would henceforward work in friendly unison. We could not then foresee that those whose hands had been thus freed would assume such a criminally frivolous attitude, both towards his death and towards the duties which confronted them. We did not for a moment realize that personal interest, base truckling, and the thirst for power and reputation would so effectively stifle all feelings of duty and patriotism. The death of Rasputin opened out limited possibilities before those who were in positions of influence and power, but not one of them desired or was able to take advantage of the favorable moment. I refrained from naming those people. Someday their attitude towards Russia will be set down at its real value. But that night we were in an excited frame of mind. We passed through nerve-wracking experiences. We had fulfilled an onerous duty towards our emperor and our country. Gloomy forebodings were far removed from us. In the midst of our conversation, I was suddenly seized by a vague feeling of alarm. I was overwhelmed by the desire to go down to the dining room. I went downstairs and unlocked the door. Rasputin lay motionless, but on touching him, I discovered that he was still warm. I felt his pulse. There was no beat. From his wound, drops of blood trickled and fell on the granite floor. It was an awe-inspiring and revolting sight. I cannot explain why, but I suddenly seized him by both arms and violently shook him. The body rose, leant sideways, and fell back to its former position, the head hanging lifelessly to one side. I stood over him for a little time longer and was on the point of going away when my attention was arrested by a slight trembling of his left eyelid. I bent down over him and attentively examined his face. It began to twitch convulsively. The movements became more and more pronounced. Suddenly, the left eye half opened. An instant later, the right lid trembled and lifted, and both eyes of Rasputin, fixed themselves upon me with an expression of devilish hatred. My blood froze in speechless horror. I was petrified. I wanted to run to call for help, but my feet would not move, and no sound came from me. I stood riveted to the floor as if in a nightmare. Then the incredible happened. With a violent movement, Rasputin jumped to his feet. I was horror-stricken. The room resounded with a wild roar. His fingers, convulsively knotted, flashed through the air. Like red-hot iron, they grasped my shoulder and tried to grip me by the throat. His eyes were crossed and obtruded terribly. He was foaming at the mouth. And in a hoarse whisper, he constantly repeated my name. I cannot convey in words the fear which possessed me. I tried to tear myself away, but his iron clutch held me with incredible strength. A terrible struggle ensued. This dying, poisoned, and shot-ridden creature, raised by the powers of darkness to avenge his destruction, inspired me with a feeling so terrifying, so ghastly, that the memory of it haunts me to this day. At that moment, I understand and felt in the fullest degree the real power of Rasputin. It seemed that the devil himself, incarnate in this music, was holding me in vice-like fingers, never to let me go. But with a supreme effort, I tore myself free. Rasputin groaned and fell backwards, still gripping my epaulette, which he had torn off in the struggle. I looked at him. He lay all huddled up, motionless. But again he stirred. I rushed upstairs, calling for Pereskovich, who was in my study, to come to my aid. Quick, quick, the revolver. He is alive, I shouted. I myself was unarmed. I had given my revolver to the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. At the door of my study, I met Pereskovich, who had heard my desperate call for assistance. He was amazed to learn that Rasputin was still alive, and hurriedly took out his revolver from its holster. At that moment, I heard sounds behind me. I realized that it was Rasputin, and in an instant I found myself in my study. Here on the writing table, I had left the loaded stick, which Malikov had given me in case I might ever want it. I seized it and rushed out. Rasputin, on all fours, was rapidly making his way up the staircase, bellowing and snorting like a wounded animal. Suddenly he gathered himself up and made a final leap toward the wicket door leading to the courtyard. In the full certainty that the door was locked and that the key was in the possession of those who had left us, I stood on the staircase landing, firmly grasping the loaded stick. But to my horror and surprise, the wicket door opened, and Rasputin vanished through it into the darkness. Pereskovich immediately rushed after him. 2 shots rang out, resounding all over the yard. I was beside myself with the idea that he might escape us. I rushed to the main entrance and ran along the Moika quayside towards the courtyard, hoping, in case Pereskovich had missed him, to stop Rasputin at the gates. There were 3 entrances to the courtyard, and only the center gates were unlocked. Through the railing, I saw that it was just to those gates that Rasputin, led by instinct, was heading. A 3rd shot rang out, and a 4th. Rasputin stumbled and fell near a snow heap. Pereskovich ran up to him, stood still for a few seconds, and evidently having decided that everything was now over and that Rasputin was killed, with rapid steps turned back to the house. I called out to him, but he did not hear me. After looking round and finding that the streets were empty and that the shots had not attracted attention, I entered the courtyard and went up to the snow mound where Rasputin was lying. He showed no signs of life. On his left temple gaped a large wound, which, as I afterwards learned, was caused by Pereskovich's heel. But in the meantime, police were approaching me from 2 sides. A policeman came through the gate straight to the spot where Rasputin was lying, and my 2 servants ran towards me from the house. All 3 had been alarmed by the shots. I stopped the policeman on the way. While speaking to him, I was careful to keep my face turned toward the snow mound, so that he should be forced to turn his back on the spot where Rasputin was lying. Your Highness, he said, recognizing me, I heard shots. Has anything happened? No, nothing serious. A stupid business. I had some friends with me tonight, and one of them drank too much, rather too much, and began shooting and making all this disturbance. If anybody asks you what's been going on, just say that everything is all right. As I talked to him, I led him towards the gates. I then returned to the spot where Rasputin was lying. My servant stood there. Pereskovich had told them to carry the body into the house. I went closer to the mound. Rasputin lay in a different position. My God, he is still alive, I thought. Terror seized me at the mere idea that he would again jump and seize me by the throat, and I hurried into the house. I went to my study and called Pereskovich, but he was not there. That blood-curdling whisper of my name rang in my ears all the time. I staggered to my dressing room to get a drink of water. Pereskovich ran in. Here you are. I've been looking for you everywhere, he exclaimed. Everything swam before my eyes, and I thought I was about to fall. Pereskovich seized me by the arm and led me to the study. We had hardly entered when my servant hurried in and announced that the policeman with whom I had spoken wanted to see me again, and that this time he had come through the main entrance, avoiding the courtyard. It appeared that the shots had been heard at the district police station, and the policeman had been instructed to give an explanation by telephone. His first version had failed to satisfy the local authorities, and they insisted on being given all the details. As soon as he caught sight of the policeman, Pereskovich quickly went up to him and, raising his voice, said, Have you heard of Rasputin, the man who has been betraying our country, our emperor, and our soldiers at the front? He's been selling us to the Germans. Do you hear?" The policeman was struck dumb with surprise. He did not in the least understand what was wanted of him, and he remained silent. "Do you know who I am?" Pereskovich went on excitedly. "I'm Vladimir Petrofanovich Pereskovich, member of the Imperial Duma. Those shots which you heard killed Rasputin, and if you love your country and your Tsar, you must not breathe a word about it." I was horror-stricken at this conversation, but it was quite impossible to intervene and put an end to it. Everything had happened too quickly and too unexpectedly. Pereskovich seemed to be seized by a kind of nervous exaltation. Obviously, he himself did not realize what he was saying. "You have done a good deed. I will say nothing. But if they make me give evidence on oath, I shall say all that I know. There'll be no help for it. It's a sin to swear falsely," the policeman answered at last. With these words, he left us. From his demeanor, it was clear that what he had just learned had deeply affected him. Pereskovich ran after him. When they had gone, my servant told me that Rasputin's body had been carried from the courtyard to the bottom of the spiral staircase. I was feeling ill. My head was still reeling, and I could scarcely move. But I pulled myself together and, mechanically taking up the loaded stick from the table, made my way out of the study. On going downstairs, I saw Rasputin lying on the lower landing. Blood was flowing freely from his many wounds. The chandelier at the top of the staircase lit up his head and threw into full relief his mutilated and blood-spattered face. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to get away as far as possible from this revolting scene, and yet I felt irresistibly drawn towards it. The impulse was so strong that I could not struggle against it. My head was bursting asunder. My thoughts were confused. I was beside myself with rage and spite. Some sort of paroxysm seized me. I rushed at the body and began battering it with the loaded stick. In my frenzy, I hit anywhere. At that moment, all the laws of God and man were set at naught. Pereskovich subsequently told me that it was such a harrowing sight that he would never be able to forget it. I lost consciousness. In the meantime, the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, Captain Sukhotin, and Dr. Lazavert returned in the closed car. On hearing from Pereskovich all that had happened, they decided not to disturb me. They wrapped the body in a cloth, placed it in the car, and drove off to Petrovsky Island. From a bridge there, the remains of Rasputin were thrown into the water. Chapter 15, Why a Dog Was Killed. When I finally regained consciousness, I felt as if I had just emerged from a serious illness, as if after a violent storm I were drinking deep breaths of pure fresh air. My servant and I proceeded to obliterate all traces of blood which might betray us. When everything incriminating had been cleaned and put in order, I went out into the courtyard to take further precautions. Some sort of explanation for the shots had to be provided. My plan was a simple one. I would announce that one of my visitors, on leaving the house, had noticed a dog in the courtyard, and that being rather the worse for liquor, he had fired at it. Accordingly, my servant took one of the dogs into an outbuilding in the inner courtyard and shot it. He then dragged its body over Rasputin's trail so as to frustrate any subsequent blood analysis, and threw it on the snow mound, where not so long ago before the dead starets had lain. In case of police dogs might be used, we poured camphor on the bloodstains which were visible in the snow. I then assembled all those of my household who had been chance witnesses of what had happened and explained to them its significance. They listened in silence, and from their expressions it was clear that they were all determined to say nothing whatever about it. It was already nearly 5 a.m. when I left the house for the Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich's palace. The feeling that the first step toward Russia's salvation had been taken filled me with energy and inspired me with an unclouded belief in the future. On entering my room at the palace, I found my brother-in-law, Prince Theodore Alexandrovich, there. He had been sitting up all night expecting my return. "Thank God, you've come at last. Well, what has happened?" "Rasputin is killed, and I can't say anything more just now. I'm too tired." Foreseeing that on the following morning I should be interrogated and that measures would perhaps be taken against me, I felt I should have need of all my strength. I went to bed and fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 16, Enthusiasm at St. Petersburg. I slept soundly until 10 o'clock. I had hardly opened my eyes when I was told that the chief of the police of the Kazan district, General Grigoriev wanted to see me on very urgent business. I hurriedly rose, dressed, and went into the study, where General Grigoriev was awaiting me. Your visit, I said, is probably connected with shots which were heard in the courtyard of our house. Yes, I've come to learn from you at first-hand full details of what occurred. Was not Rasputin a guest here yesterday evening? Rasputin? He never visits me, I replied. The shots heard from your courtyard are nevertheless associated with his disappearance, and the prefect of police has ordered me to make immediate inquiry into what happened at your house last night. This association of the shots on the Moika with the disappearance of Rasputin foreshadowed grave complications. I had carefully to weigh and estimate the effect of every word I used before I could give any answer to the question which was put to me. But what is the source of your information that Rasputin has disappeared? I asked. General Grigoriev told me that early in the morning, an inspector, accompanied by the policeman on duty in the neighborhood of my house, had come to him and reported that at 3 a.m. a number of shots had been fired. The policeman had inspected his beat, but had found everything quiet, the streets empty, and the Vorniki asleep at the gates. Suddenly, someone had hailed him with the words, "Come quickly, the prince wants you." The policeman had complied and had been conducted to my study. There he had seen me with another person. The latter had come towards him and asked, "Do you know me?" "No, sir, I do not," the policeman replied. "Have you ever heard of Purishkevich?" "Yes, sir." "I am Purishkevich. Do you love the Tsar and your fatherland?" "Yes, sir." "If you love them, swear that you will tell no one. Rasputin is dead." After this conversation, the policeman had been conducted out of the house. He had at first returned to his post, but later, out of fear, he had decided to report the incident to his superiors. I listened attentively and tried to preserve an expression of utter surprise. All those in the plot had solemnly sworn not to divulge our secret, and I was bound by this promise. We had then hoped to conceal all evidence of the assassination. The political situation demanded that Rasputin's disappearance should remain a mystery. "What an incredible story," I exclaimed when General Grigoriev had finished. "How tiresome that just because this policeman did not understand what was said to him, so much unpleasantness may arise. I will tell you at once in detail what really happened. Last night, a number of friends and acquaintances came to supper with me. Among them were the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich, M. Purishkevich, and a number of officers. A good deal of wine was consumed, and everyone was in excellent humor. When my guests began to leave, I suddenly heard 2 shots from the direction of the courtyard. I went out and saw one of our yard dogs lying dead in the snow. One of my friends, excited by wine, had fired his revolver as he left the house and had accidentally killed the animal. Fearing that the shots might have attracted the attention of the police, I sent for the policeman on duty in order to explain them to him. By this time, all the guests had departed with the exception of Purishkevich. When the policeman entered, Purishkevich hurried towards him and began speaking with him in an undertone. I noticed that the policeman had become confused. I do not know what was actually said, but from your words it is now clear to me that Purishkevich, who was also rather excited, spoke of the dog that had been killed, and comparing it with Rasputin, regretted it had not been the starets instead. The policeman obviously did not grasp his meaning. That's the only explanation I can suggest for this misunderstanding. I sincerely hope that everything will soon be cleared up satisfactorily. And if it is true that Rasputin has vanished, I trust that his disappearance will not be associated with the shots at our house. Yes, it is all clear to me now, but tell me, Prince, who were your guests other than the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and M. Purishkevich? I must decline to answer that question. The whole of this affair, trivial as it is, may take a serious turn. They are my friends. There are their families to think of. Their official positions might be prejudiced in spite of their innocence. I am very grateful, Prince, for your information, said the general. I shall drive straight to the prefect and report to him all you have told me. Your explanation clears up this incident and completely guarantees you from unpleasant consequences of any kind. I requested General Grigoriev to tell the prefect that I would like to see him and asked him to let me know at what time I could be received. As soon as he had gone, I was called to the telephone. It was M. What have you done with Grigory Efimovich? She asked. With Grigory Efimovich? What a strange question. What? Wasn't he with you yesterday? She exclaimed in alarm. Then where is he? Come and see me quickly, for God's sake. I am in a terrible state of mind. The prospect of that conversation with M oppressed me beyond words. What could I say to one who was so genuinely attached to me who had such confidence in me, never doubting a single word that I uttered. How should I look her in the eyes when she asked, "What have you done with Grigory Efimovitch?" But I had to go, and within a half hour I arrived in the G's drawing room. An atmosphere of distress pervaded the house. On all sides there were anxious and tear-stained faces. M was hardly recognizable. She ran towards me and, in a voice trembling with emotion, said, "Tell me, for God's sake, where is Grigory Efimovitch? What have you done with him? They say he was killed in your house and that you are his murderer." I tried to calm her and told her in detail the story that I had prepared. "Oh, how terrible it all is. Both the Empress and Anya are sure he was killed during the night, and that it was done in your house and by you. Ring up Tsarsko at once. If the Empress will receive me, I will explain everything to her. Ring me up as quickly as possible," I insisted. M did as I asked. She was informed that the Empress would see me. Just as I was leaving in order to proceed straight to the Empress, M called me back. Apart from her alarm at the disappearance of Rasputin, her face now showed traces of a new anxiety. "Don't go to Tsarsko. Don't go," she implored. "Something dreadful will happen to you. They will never believe that you had nothing to do with it. They were all in a terrible state of mind. They say that I've betrayed them. Oh, why did I listen to you? I oughtn't to have telephoned. It was a great mistake. Oh, what have I done?" Her anxiety on my behalf and her whole attitude towards me showed such affectionate devotion that it cost me a supreme effort to restrain myself from confessing everything to her. It was torture to me to have to deceive her. She was so kind and she trusted me so implicitly. She came close to me, timidly looking at me in her kind, innocent eyes, and made the sign of cross over me. "God preserve you. I will pray for you," she said in a low voice. Suddenly, a bell rang. It was a telephone call from the Tsarsko. Vyrubova was speaking. The Empress was not feeling well and could not receive me. I was to send her a written report of all I knew concerning the disappearance of Rasputin. "Thank God, I'm so relieved that you're not going there," said M. I bade her goodbye and went out into the street. I had only taken a few steps when I met one of my friends from the Corps de Page. He ran up to me in great excitement. "Felix," he exclaimed, "have you heard the news? Rasputin is killed." "Impossible. Who killed him?" "They say it happened at the Gypsies, but nobody yet knows who did it." "I hope to God it's true," I said. He went on his way, very pleased with himself at having been the first to give me such a sensational piece of news, and I went back to the palace, expecting to find a reply from the prefect of police. The reply was awaiting me. General Bulk would see me immediately. When I arrived at his office, I found the place in great turmoil. The general was in his room, sitting at a writing table. He looked very worried. I told him that I had come in order to clear up the misunderstanding that had arisen over Pereshkovich's words. I added that I was anxious to lose no time in doing so, since he was proceeding on leave that evening for the Crimea, where my family was awaiting me. I did not wish to be detained in St. Petersburg by interrogations and various other formalities. The prefect replied that the explanations which I had given to General Grigoriev were entirely satisfactory, and he did not foresee any difficulties over my departure. But he had to inform me that he had received orders from the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna to search our house on the Moika, in view of the suspicious shots which in the night and the rumors of my association with the disappearance of Rasputin. "My wife is a niece of the emperor," I said. "Members of the imperial family and their residences are inviolable, and measures against them cannot be taken except by order of His Majesty the Emperor himself." The prefect was obliged to agree with me on this point in my presence, he at once gave instructions by telephone countermanding the search. This greatly relieved me. I had been obsessed by the feeling that in getting the rooms in order overnight, a good deal had escaped us, and that it was therefore necessary at all costs to postpone any search until after we had carried out a thorough inspection and had removed every trace of what really had occurred. I took my leave of General Bulk and returned to the Moika, breathing more freely now that this difficulty had been overcome. My fears turned out to be well-founded. On examining the dining room and stairs by daylight, I noticed brown stains on the floor and carpets. My servants and I removed every trace that was to be found. We worked with a will and soon completed our task. But we were unable to remove stains which were visible near the entrance to the courtyard, where the blood had soaked into the stone flags. Our only resource would be to explain that they had been caused by the dead dog. But suppose they should make a search after all, and should make a chemical analysis of these stains. Matters might then take a very serious turn. It was essential, therefore, that we should find some means of concealing these traces. We accordingly decided to paint them over with oil color of the same tint as the stones, and to cover the whole with a thick layer of snow. It seemed that we had now done everything possible to throw off the examining authorities on a false scent. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went to lunch with the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. He told me in general terms how they had disposed of Rasputin's body. On returning to the Moika in the closed car, the Grand Duke had found me unconscious. His first impulse was to remain with me until I recovered, but there was no time to spare, for dawn was approaching. Rasputin's body, closely wrapped in a cloth and tightly bound with a cord, was placed in the car. The Grand Duke acted as a chauffeur. Sukhotin sat beside him, and Pereskovich, with Dr. Lazavert and my servant, sat behind. They stopped as soon as they reached the Petrovsky Bridge. The sentry's box stood out in a distance. Fearing that the noise of the motor and the powerful rays of the lamps might attract attention, the Grand Duke stopped the engine and extinguished the lights. Complete confusion reigned. They were on edge with excitement. In their nervous haste, they omitted to attach weights on the body before throwing it into a large fissure in the ice, and they even failed to remove the outer garments. To crown these misfortunes, the car at first refused to start, but after a brief delay, the Grand Duke managed to set it in motion. In turning, he drove quite near to the sentry box. Its occupant was fast asleep. The party drove back without further incident. In conclusion, the Grand Duke expressed the opinion that in all likelihood the body had already been carried down to the sea by the river current. I then gave him an account of my adventures and conversations during that morning. Captain Sukhotin came in after lunch. We asked him to go and find Pereskovich and to bring him to us at the palace. That evening, Pereskovich was leaving for the front with his hospital train, and I was leaving for the Crimea, while on the following day the Grand Duke was to proceed to GHQ. It was essential, therefore, that we should all meet and agree upon a common line of action in the event of detention, arrest, or cross-examination of any one of us. After discussion, we agreed to uphold the explanations which I had already given to Grigoriev, to M, and to the prefect of police. Whatever happened, whatever new proofs might be found against us, we were to maintain this attitude. We had taken the first step. The way was now open for those who realized all that had been happening and were in a position to continue that struggle against Rasputinism which we had begun. For the time being, we ought to stand aside, and on this decision we parted. Chapter 17, Interrogatories and Depositions. On leaving the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich's palace, I returned home to Moika 94 to discover whether anything fresh had arisen. When I arrived there, I was told that in the course of the day, all my servants had been cross-examined. I did not know the result of these inquiries, but the accounts which my servants gave of them tended to reassure me. Nevertheless, I did not like the look of things. I was afraid that I might be delayed by various formalities, so prevented from being with my family at Christmas time. I resolved, therefore, to call on the Minister of Justice, M. Makarov, to ascertain how matters stood. The Ministry of Justice, like the Prefecture of Police, was in a state of great excitement. The minister was in conference with the public prosecutor, who I met coming out of the door of Mr. M. Makarov's room as I went in. He regarded me with unconcealed curiosity as we passed. I had not met M. Makarov before, and I liked him at first sight. He was a thin, elderly man with gray hair and beard, a kindly appearance, and a soft voice. I explained the object of my visit, and at his request repeated from the very beginning with full details the story which, by now, I had learned by heart. When I reached that part of it which bore reference to Pereskovich's conversation with the policeman, M. Makarov interrupted me with the words, "I know Vladimir Mitrofanovich very well. He never drinks. If I am not mistaken, he is even a member of the Temperance League." "I can assure you," I answered, "that on this occasion Vladimir Mitrofanovich betrayed both himself and the League, of which you state he is a member. He found it difficult to refuse wine. I was giving a housewarming, and we all pressed him to drink with us. As he was unaccustomed to it, a very few glasses sufficed to affect him. When I had finished my explanation, I asked M. Makarov whether my servants were immune from further cross-examination and unpleasantness, as they all felt rather anxious in view of my departure that evening for the Crimea. The minister reassured me on this point. He said that in all likelihood the police authorities would make no further inquiries, and that for his part he would neither sanction a search of the house nor attach any importance to rumors or gossip in the town. Just as I was departing, I asked the minister whether I might leave St. Petersburg. He replied in the affirmative and once again expressed his regret that I should have been subjected to so much trouble and unpleasantness through such a misunderstanding. From the Ministry of Justice, I went to my uncle, M. Rodzianko, the president of the Imperial Duma. He and his wife had known beforehand of our resolve to put an end to Rasputin, and they were impatiently awaiting a full account of what had happened. On entering their drawing room, I noticed they were both agitated and were discussing something or other with raised voices. My aunt came up to me with tears in her eyes. She embraced me and made the sign of the cross over me. My uncle also welcomed me in his voice of thunder and embraced me. I particularly appreciated such warmth of affection. Far away from my own people, completely alone, I was passing through a very difficult period. This fatherly attitude cheered and calmed me. But I could not stay long with them, as my train was leaving at 9 o'clock that evening, and I had not yet packed. I gave them a brief account of the assassination and then took my leave. We shall now stand aside and leave further action to others, I said, as we parted. Please God that by common endeavor the emperor may be given an opportunity of realizing the truth before it is too late. It would be difficult to imagine a more favorable moment. I'm convinced that the assassination of Rasputin will be regarded as a patriotic deed, replied Rodzianko, and that everyone will unite to save Russia from ruin. From the Rodziankos, I went to the palace of the Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich. As I entered the hall, the doorkeeper informed me that a lady to whom I had given an appointment for 7 o'clock was already awaiting me in the study. I had not given any such appointment. This unlooked-for visit greatly surprised me, and I asked for a description of the lady's appearance. I learned that she was dressed in black, that her face could hardly be seen, and she was wearing a very thick veil. My misgivings prompted me to pass into my bedroom to examine my mysterious visitor. What was my astonishment on looking through the chink in the folding doors to recognize one of the most fervent admirers of Rasputin. I called the doorkeeper and instructed him to tell my uninvited guest that I was out and should be returning very late that evening. I quickly packed and then went up to dinner. On the stairs, I met my friend Oswald Rayner, an English officer who I had known since our Oxford days. He realized the truth of all that had happened and was very anxious on my behalf. I assured him that up to the present everything was well. At dinner, there were the three elder brothers of my wife, who were to accompany me to the Crimea, their tutor, Mr. Stewart, Mademoiselle Evrianova, one of the ladies in waiting to the Grand Duchess, Xenia Alexandrovna, Rayner, and a number of others. They were all excited by the news of the mysterious disappearance of Rasputin, and the most unlikely rumors were discussed. Some of those present did not believe in the death of the starets. They maintained he was alive and that everything said to the contrary was sheer invention. Others quoted reliable sources, even eyewitnesses, in support of their assertion that he had been killed during a debauch at the Gypsies. Others again confidently announced that he had been killed in my house on the Moika and that I had participated in his murder. The less credulous among them thought it hardly probable that I had taken an active part in the assassination itself, but held that in any case I was aware of all the details, and they plied me with questions. Searching glances were directed at me from all sides in the hope of reading the truth in my face. But I kept calm and joined in the general rejoicing, and thanks to my demeanor, these suspicions were gradually allayed. In the meantime, the telephone bell rang incessantly. Throughout the whole of St. Petersburg, my name was associated with the disappearance of Rasputin. I was rung up by relations, by friends, by members of the Duma, by representatives and directors of various industries and factories who announced that their employees intended to form a guard for me in case of need. To one and all, I replied that the rumors of my participation in the murder of Rasputin were false, and that I knew nothing about it. My train was due to start in a half an hour. After saying goodbye to the rest of the company, I entered into the car with my brothers in law, Prince Andrew, Prince Theodore, Prince Nikita, their tutor, and Rainer. On arrival at the station, I noticed a large force of the palace police collected on the steps of the main entrance. This astonished me. Had an order been issued for my arrest, I wondered? We left the car and went up the steps. When I was level with the colonel of the gendarmes, he came up to me and in an excited voice said something quite unintelligible. Could you speak a little louder, Colonel? I said, I can't hear what you say. He pulled himself together and raising his voice said, By Her Majesty's orders, you are forbidden to leave St. Petersburg. You must return to the palace and remain there until further instructions. I'm sorry to hear this, I replied, and turning to my companions, I repeated to them the imperial command. My arrest came as a complete surprise to them. Prince Andrew and Prince Theodore decided that they would not go to the Crimea, but would remain with me. Prince Nikita alone should leave, accompanied by his tutor. We went to see them off. The police followed us. They seemed afraid that I might board the train and get away. We presented an unusual spectacle as we proceeded along the platform. The public stood still, their eyes turned upon us with curiosity. When I entered the carriage to say a few words to Prince Nikita, the police again showed uneasiness. I calmed their fears by telling them that I had no intention of evading them, but simply wanted to say goodbye to those who were leaving us. The train started and we went back to the car. It is strange to feel oneself arrested, I thought. I wonder what is in store for me. Everyone at home was astonished at our return and could not understand what it meant. I was tired out by the events of the day, and as I soon reached my room, I lay down. I asked Prince Theodore and Rainer to stay with me for a while. While we were talking, Prince Andrew ran into the room and announced the arrival of the Grand Duke Nicholas Mikhailovich. This late visit foreboded ill for me. He had apparently come to find out from me full details of all that had happened, and he had arrived just at a moment when I felt tired, wanted to sleep, and was not in the mood for such conversations. There were strange contradictions in the character of the Grand Duke Nicholas Mikhailovich. A learned historian, a man of great intellect and independence of mind, in his dealings with people, he at times adopted a tone of excessive banter. He was inclined to be garrulous and to speak on matters which he should have preserved silence. He detested Rasputin and fully realized how harmful he was to Russia. In his political outlook, he was an extreme liberal. He sharply criticized current events. He had even suffered for such free expression of his thoughts and had previously been dismissed from St. Petersburg to Grushevka, his estate in the province of Kherson. Prince Theodore and Rainer had hardly closed the door behind me when the Grand Duke entered from the opposite side of the room. He turned to me with the words, Well now, tell me, what have you been up to? I feigned astonishment and said, Surely you don't believe these rumors about me? Why, it's all a crass misunderstanding. I've really nothing whatever to do with it. Tell that to others, not to me. I know everything, every detail, even the names of the women who were at the party. His last words showed to me that he knew absolutely nothing, and that he was merely pretending to be well informed in order that he might trip me up. I told him exactly the same story of my housewarming party and the shooting of the dog. Apparently, he believed my tale, but to preserve himself against error, he smiled knowingly at me as he left. It was clear that he not only knew nothing, but that he was intensely annoyed at having failed to get any information out of me. After he had gone, Prince Andrew, Prince Theodore, and Rainer rejoined me. I told them that in the morning I should move to the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich's palace in order to be with him until our fate was decided. I fully explained to them that what answers they were to give if they should be cross-questioned. They promised to follow my instructions to the letter, then bade me good night and left. The events of the previous night passed before my eyes, one thought succeeding another until, at last, my head grew heavy with fatigue, and I fell asleep. Chapter 18. At the palace of the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. Early in the morning, I moved to the palace of the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich. He was very surprised to see me, and he had felt certain that I had left for the Crimea on the previous evening. I told him of my arrest and of my decision to come and stay with him in view of the complications that had arisen and of the possibility of measures being taken against us both. I also recounted to him my conversations with the various people whom I had met. In his turn, he told me all that he had done during the previous day. In the evening, he had gone to the Mikhailovsky Theater, but he had been obliged to leave as he was warned that the audience was about to give him an ovation. On returning home from the theater, he had learned that Tsarsko Selo, he was credited with having taken a leading part in the assassination. He had then telephoned to the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna and requested her to receive him, but she had categorically refused. After chatting a little longer with him, I went to the room which had been allotted to me. I sent for the newspapers and went through them, looking for references to what had occurred. There was nothing beyond the bald statement that on the night of the 16th, 17th of December, the Starets, Grigory Rasputin, had been killed. The morning passed quietly, and about 1 o'clock, just as we were having lunch, General Maximovich, ADC to the Emperor, telephoned to the Grand Duke to inform him that he was under arrest by order of the Empress and was requested not to leave his palace. He added that he would shortly arrive in person and communicate further details. The Grand Duke returned to the dining room, very much perturbed by this conversation. Felix, he said, I'm arrested by the orders of the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna. She has no right to take this step. The Emperor alone can issue such an order. General Maximovich arrived in the midst of our discussion. He was shown into the study. When the Grand Duke entered the room, the general met him with the words, Her Majesty requests your Imperial Highness not to leave your palace. What does this mean, arrest? No, it is not arrest, but Her Majesty nevertheless insists you should not leave your palace. The Grand Duke replied with deliberation, I maintain that this is arrest. Inform Her Majesty that I submit at her command. With these words, he left the study. In the course of the day, the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich was visited in turn by nearly all the members of the imperial house who were in St. Petersburg at the time. They were deeply concerned over his arrest and over the fact that the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna had so far exceeded her powers as to give orders that a member of the imperial family should be deprived of his liberty on the mere supposition that he was a party to the murder of Rasputin. On the same day that the Grand Duke received a telegram from the Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna in Moscow, again associating my name with the disappearance of Rasputin. Aware of the ties of friendship between us and not suspecting that he himself had taken an active part in the destruction of the Starets, the Grand Duchess requested him to tell me that she was praying for me and bless my patriotic action. This telegram seriously compromised us. Protopopov intercepted it and sent a copy of it to Tsarsko Selo, to the Empress, who immediately concluded that the Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna was also in on the plot. The telephone bell rang incessantly, and the person who rang up most frequently was the Grand Duke Nicholas Mikhailovich. He gave us the most incredible news. He came to see us several times a day. He affected to know everything and tried to trip us up at every turn. Seeking by every possible means to discover the whole truth, he pretended to be our ally in the hope that we should heedlessly commit ourselves. He was not satisfied with conversations on the telephone and his constant visits to us. He took a most active part in the search for Rasputin's body. During one of his visits, he incidentally informed us that the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna was fully persuaded of our complicity in the death of Rasputin and was demanding that we should be shot out of hand, but that everyone was restraining her. Even Protopopov had advised her to await the emperor's arrival from general headquarters. A telegram had been dispatched to the emperor, and he was expected at any moment. On the same day that we heard of this news from the Grand Duke Nicholas Mikhailovich, M communicated to me the no less unpleasant information that attempts were afoot against our lives, and advised us to take all possible precautions. It appeared that on the previous evening she had been an involuntary witness of how, in Rasputin's flat, 20 of his most ardent followers had sworn to avenge him. It was a particularly exhausting day for both the Grand Duke and Dmitry Pavlovich and myself, and we felt relieved when all our visitors had left. It had been difficult to keep a constant guard on ourselves in the presence of others, to preserve our serenity and to endeavor, by our own calm attitude towards events and rumors, to dispel all suspicion of our participation in the murder. Now that we were alone, we talked for a long time, exchanging our impressions of all that we had heard. I had never before known the Grand Duke so simple and so sincere. The horror through which we had lived left a deep mark on his sensitive nature, and I felt happy to be at his side, sharing with enforced solitude during this period beset with anxiety. Chapter 19. The body recovered. On the morning of the following day, December 19th, the Emperor arrived from GHQ. Those in attendance upon him said that on receiving the news of Rasputin's death, his mood was more cheerful than since the outbreak of war. He himself evidently felt and believed that the disappearance of the starets had freed him from those heavy fetters which he had lacked the strength to cast off. But with his return to Tsarsko Selo, his mood abruptly changed, and once again he fell under the influence of those who surrounded him. All sorts of rumors continued to circulate in the town. All classes of society lived on them, believed in them, and were deeply affected by them. News of our impending execution reached the workmen of large factories and caused great fermentation among them. They held meetings at which they passed resolutions to the effect that they would save us and would organize a secret guard to protect us. Although we were on the footing of persons under arrest, and except for members of the imperial family, no one was supposed to be admitted into the Sergei Palace. Our friends and acquaintances nevertheless managed to visit us. Officers of various regiments came with the assurance that their commands, to a man, were ready to defend us. They had been deeply affected by the event and submitted to the Grand Duke various plans based on decisive action, to which he could not, of course, agree. On this day, we were visited by an unusual number of people. Members of the imperial house had been arriving at the palace since the early morning. On going into the study, we found them assembled there, and they inundated us with questions. On the previous day, their attention had been so entirely preoccupied by the arrest of the Grand Duke that they did not discuss anything else. Now, however, they wanted to know full details of Rasputin's mysterious disappearance, but they only heard from us the same story. The Grand Duke Nicholas Mikhailovich arrived just before dinner and told us that Rasputin's body had been found in an ice hole behind Petrovsky Bridge. In the evening, General Maximovich returned and informed the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, in the name of the Emperor this time, that he was under arrest. We passed an uneasy night. At about 3 a.m., we were awakened with a warning that suspicious persons were in the palace, having gained access to the back entrance. They had explained to the servants that they had been sent to guard the premises, but as they had no written authority, they were all expelled, and the palace servants were posted at the entrances. On December 20th, almost the whole of the imperial family assembled again for tea. They reopened their discussion of the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich's arrest, now officially confirmed by the emperor. Not one of them was reconciled to such treatment of a member of the imperial family. They regarded it as an affair of state and as an event of the gravest significance. It did not occur to anyone that there were more serious questions at issue, that on the emperor's actions during the next few days hung the destiny of the country, the fate of the throne and dynasty, and the outcome of the war, which could not end in victory without complete harmony between the supreme power and the people. The end of Rasputin had brought into the foreground the question and the end of Rasputinism, the necessity of a new trend in politics, which were now or never to be disentangled from criminal intrigues. After the members of the imperial house had left, General Laming, the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich's former tutor, came in. He lived in the palace and often visited us. He gave us full details of the recovery of Rasputin's body from the river. The official inquiry into the disappearance of Rasputin had been entrusted to Colonel Globachev, chief of the secret police. He informed the public prosecutor of the St. Petersburg Courts of Justice that after a thorough search, a black snow boot, size number 11, covered with recent bloodstains, had been found on the Petrovsky Bridge. This snow boot was taken to Rasputin's flat, where it was recognized as the property of the murdered man. Further, the snow on the bridge bore numerous footmarks and traces of motor tires right up to the parapet itself. Thus, according to Colonel Globachev, the clues to the discovery of the murderer should be sought not at Moika 94, but at the opposite end of town, on the Petrovsky Bridge. Following this report, further searches were made and the Petrovsky Bridge was re-examined. All the higher officials of the administrative and of the judicial world were paired there. The bare enumeration of the post which they occupied is in itself proof of the importance in which Rasputin was held, and shows what a national disaster his death seemed in the eyes of the government and of the supreme power. At the inspection of the bridge, according to the official report on the murder of Rasputin, there were present senior officials of the Ministry of Justice, with the minister at their head, the public prosecutor of the St. Petersburg Courts of Justice, the deputy public prosecutor, the examining magistrate for cases of special gravity, and a representative of the Ministry of the Interior. All these important state officials concentrated their attention and zeal on solving the problem which mystified them. They interrogated the policeman on duty, the watchman at an alehouse nearby, the watchman from the home for aged artists of the imperial theaters, but all to no purpose. There followed a further and most minute search. On this occasion, a fresh clue was found, a piece of matting bearing traces of blood. Further, attention was drawn to the fact that at one point on the bridge railing, the snow had been displaced in such a way as to justify the assumption that some object had lain there. This circumstance tended to confirm the opinion that the murder of Rasputin must have taken place here on the Petrovsky Bridge, a deserted spot on the very outskirts of town, and nowhere else, certainly not on the Moika, which was at the opposite end of St. Petersburg. There were two main reasons which impelled the examining authorities to favor this theory. In the first place, they maintained that if the body had been conveyed through the streets, traces of blood would have been discovered somewhere along the route taken. Yet the whole town had been searched, and no bloodstains had been found. Secondly, there was the discovery of the victim's snow boot. It could hardly be supposed that before the body was conveyed from the actual scene of the crime, it was clothed so completely that even the snow boots were not forgotten. The examining authorities accordingly reconstructed the crime on the following lines. Rasputin was killed on the bridge itself. His body lay over the balustrade for a time, and was then thrown down into the ice hole just opposite the spot where the blood-stained piece of matting had been found, and where the snow had been brushed away from the railing. Divers were immediately summoned. The bottom of the river was searched for 2.5 hours, but the body was not discovered. The divers maintained that the current of the Neva, exceptionally strong at this point, might have carried it under the ice far beyond the Petrovsky Bridge. Their work was interrupted for a time by heavy frosts. The bridge was roped off and a guard was placed at its approaches. But in the meantime, one of the river police, while making a hole in the ice, chanced to notice the sleeve of a beaver fur coat frozen to the undersurface. He promptly reported this to his superior officer. Orders were given to cut through the ice, and a quarter of an hour afterwards, the body of Rasputin was taken from the water, having been found at a point about 30 sajans distant from the Petrovsky Bridge. The body was covered with such a thick layer of ice that it was difficult to recognize the features. When this coating of ice had been carefully removed, the examining authorities saw the mutilated remains of Rasputin. The head of the dead man was found to have been broken in a number of places, and tufts of hair had been torn out here and there. In its fall from the bridge, the body had probably struck head foremost against the edge of an ice hole. The beard had frozen to the clothing. On the face and chest there were clots of congealed blood. One eye was blackened. The arms and legs were tightly bound round with rope, and the left fist was tightly clenched. The body was wrapped in a beaver coat thrown over the shoulders. The loose sleeves floating up and freezing to the ice had revealed the presence of the corpse. As soon as an official report of this discovery had been drawn up, the body was covered with sacking and removed to a wooden shed on the riverbank. In the meantime, there arrived at the Petrovsky Bridge the Minister of the Interior, M. Protopopov, the officer in command of the St. Petersburg Military District, the officer in command of the secret police, and various administrative officials. The public prosecutor's office was instructed to draw up a full report of the external appearance of the body and on the circumstances attending its discovery. The deputy public prosecutor, M. Galkin, who was entrusted with this task, temporarily transferred his office to a private house in the neighborhood of the Petrovsky Bridge. At 11 a.m., the examining authorities, accompanied by a number of high officials, proceeded to the shed and began a minute inspection of the body. After the clothes had been removed, 2 wounds caused by firearms were observed, one in the region of the breast near the heart, the other in the neck. The doctor stated that each of them would undoubtedly have been fatal. A domestic servant was summoned to identify the body and recognized it as being that of Grigory Rasputin of number 64, Gorokovaya Street, who had disappeared, leaving no trace on the night of December 16th. At midday, Rasputin's 2 daughters and the fiancé of one of them, Lieutenant Papkhadze, were admitted. The daughters applied for permission to have the body removed to their home, but the authorities refused. The news that Rasputin's remains had been found spread through the town like wildfire. A file of carriages and cars streamed to the Petrovsky Bridge, but the authorities gave strict instructions that no one should be admitted to the shed where the body was lying. Soon afterwards, a wooden coffin was brought in and the body was placed in it. Before this was done, however, it was twice photographed, first with its clothing and then without. The ropes which had been the legs and arms had the ropes with which the legs and arms had been bound, the beaver coat, and certain other articles were sealed up and filed as material evidence. The body in its coffin was then taken to Chesma Asylum for further examination. Long before the arrival of the persons who had been appointed to conduct the autopsy, the whole of the district in which the asylum is situated was surrounded by a strong force of police, mounted and on foot. The post-mortem continued until nearly 1 a.m. and was conducted in the presence of rows of prominent officials, including a representative of the Ministry of the Interior. The operation was performed by one of the professors of the judicial apartment of the Military Medical Academy, assisted by a number of police doctors. For 2 hours, the body was submitted to a most minute examination. Apart from the 2 wounds caused by the shots, a number of livid bruises were discovered. In the stomach was found a ductile mass, dark brown in color, but its analysis was never made, for the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna commanded that the examination should cease. It is not known what other orders were given, but at about 2 a.m., General Grigoriev, who had been present at the autopsy, directed that a car should be sent to the asylum. In the meantime, a richly decorated oak coffin had been brought to the mortuary. The remains were placed in it and conveyed in the car to a destination unknown. The route was divulged to no one. Rasputin's body was removed by agents of the secret police. Okay, I think I'll stop there. That was basically 57 minutes. A lot of comments. Thanks everybody for listening. This is an interesting book. That'll be part 5. There'll probably only be a part 6, and so then this book will be done. But it is a really incredible first-person story. And there's other stories. Like there's actually, I just mentioned this guy Oswald Rayner, who's interesting. Like he even mentions this. Felix does. Rayner is a heavy-duty kind of member of the SIS. I think he had Secret Service of like the British Empire. Like he would at that time. He had connections to intelligence, British intelligence, and he's friends here with Felix. And there's an argument that, like, I think I'll have to go back and double check, but one of the bullets that supposedly was in Rasputin was of English design and from England. Like it was from the UK. That I have to verify that. Also, Rasputin had 2 daughters, and one of his daughters wrote about him, wrote a biography. So it may be opposite of kind of what you're seeing from Felix Yusupov, who's a prince who's connected to the royal family and all that stuff. But there are interesting facts in this. But yeah, so that's part 5. There will be a part 6. Thanks for listening.